Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Sam Shea. I'm a doctor in chiropractic and a certified practitioner for the Institute for Functional Medicine, as well as a certified practitioner for the Kalish Institute for Functional Medicine, as well as a certified practitioner for Fitgenes. And today I have the privilege of talking with Dr. Cristina Fortuno, and she holds a Master's of Science in Biotechnology from the Polytechnic University of Valencia, Spain. And she also has, after gaining experience working in reproductive genetics laboratory as a research assistant, she got a scholarship to pursue a PhD in human genetics at the University of Queensland, Australia. Cristina has co-authored 3 peer-reviewed journal articles during her undergraduate studies and published 7 additional articles as a first author during her PhD. Just so people know what that means, like that's a big deal to publish peer-reviewed articles, especially as a first author. Like that's a really big deal. That's from another person who's published over 100 articles, and he said that basically every 3 major articles you publish in a peer-reviewed journal is the equivalent of 1 PhD's worth of content. So Dr. Fortuna, having published 3 during undergraduate and 7 as a first author during a PhD, like this is like a PhD plus. Okay, so I just want to give some context. People aren't familiar with the rigors of the publishing world. Lastly, she is currently working as a product development lead at Fitgenes, an Australian-based genetics testing company focused on health and wellness. Cristina is strongly motivated by the use of genomics in healthcare as a tool to improve diagnosis, deliver personalized interventions, or to find out more about an individual's predisposition to certain health traits. So thank you so much for joining us, Cristina. I'm very, very happy to chat with you about this one particular profile that Fitgenes provides called food choice, and I call it the know your understanding your food triggers profile, just to kind of make it more understandable for like intuitively, like food choice is like people. It's like, what does that mean? And I explain as understanding your trigger foods, which is trigger foods is a intentionally somewhat vague term. Does it mean intolerances? Does it mean allergies? Does it mean this? Does it mean that? But it's triggering your immune system somehow. And so we're going to be talking about these particular trigger foods. So I wanted to ask you, how did you get interested in genetics, particularly trigger foods, food triggers of food intolerances and allergies?
First of all, thanks for that nice introduction. And I've always been interested in genetics because it's a very useful tool for many areas of human health. Nowadays, it's very common for people to experience digestive issues without knowing the reasons. And also people are more and more concerned about what they eat or what foods they should avoid. So we thought that a genetic test aimed at identifying these predispositions to intolerances, sensitivities, allergies could be very attractive and useful.
So how did you choose these particular food triggers for this profile? And we'll cover, just for our listeners, we'll cover what the food, I'll just name them: gluten, lactose, alcohol, caffeine, salt, histamines, and other food allergies. How did you come to these particular food triggers?
We chose them mostly for 2 reasons. One of them is that these food triggers, such as the ones you've mentioned, gluten, lactose, caffeine, are very common in our diet, so people worry about them. For example, when you go to a restaurant, it's normal to see which options are gluten-free, lactose-free, or low salt. And the other reason is that there was enough scientific evidence supporting the role of genetics in these issues.
Okay. What is common and what has the scientific rigor behind it in order to be able to talk about these particular food triggers from a science background?
Yeah, exactly.
Can you review for our audience the difference between genetically speaking, food intolerances versus food allergies. And I know it's a frequent confusion, intolerances versus allergies. So if you we would love like a real geneticist to kind of parse those apart.
Okay, I will do my best. Food intolerance means a difficulty digesting certain substance, in general due to a lower activity or lower level of the protein involved in the metabolism of this substance. So the genes encoding these proteins that have a role in metabolism are associated with risk of food intolerances. For example, people with lactose intolerance have a genetic variant in the gene that encodes the enzyme lactase, which is necessary to break down lactose. And this variant makes them produce lower amounts of this enzyme. A food allergy, however, involves the immune system attacking a particular substance. So in this case, the genes associated with food allergies are part of the immune system instead of being part of the metabolism.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, an intolerance is we simply don't have enough enzyme to deal with whatever we're eating, and then we get our body reaction. So with lactose intolerant, like I'm not lactose intolerant, but I know people who are, that I can have enough enzyme to break down lactose, but people who don't have enough, they can take lactose, they may break down whatever percentage, but not enough. And then then there's this digestive reaction to whatever is not broken down. So they're intolerant but I don't have like immunoglobulins in my immune system attacking lactose. And whereas an allergy is where the immune system is actually mobilizing an immune response, like the body's under attack. And did I get that correctly?
Yeah, that's a very good explanation, even better than mine.
Okay. What would you say that if there's a difference between we see in genetics this concept of green, yellow, red dots. So it's like the quote unquote traffic light system. And for our listeners, a green dot is where you have two copies of genes, one from mom, one you heard from mom, one you heard from dad. And if there's a normal a normal variant, meaning a normal type, then like say with lactose, like you're able to digest lactose because you got a good copy from mom, a good copy from dad. And then there's the yellow dot, where you got one copy of the quote good or useful gene from one parent and not the good copy from the other. So one parent, one parent gives you the lactose intolerance, but the other parent gives you the gene that lets you digest on lactose. So it's kind of this hybrid. It's not red, it's not green, it's yellow. And then there's the red, which is what they call homozygous variant. Homozygous meaning you got two copies of the variant or the quote unquote bad or unuseful gene. And that's red. So both parents did not give you the gene to break down lactose intolerance. So my question is about what is the real practical difference between a red and yellow dot? So someone with, say, lactose intolerance, one person has a homozygous variant, meaning they have a red dot. They don't have the genes that make the lactose enzyme, versus someone who has one good copy and one non. So do we treat someone's yellow dot and the red dot the same? Is it based on their subjective experience, or is the subjective experience not necessarily reliable because someone can have a low inflammatory response to whatever the issue is, whether it's gluten or lactose, but it does wear down their system? Like how would you go about practically treating a red versus yellow dot?
So I will start mentioning that your explanation of what is genetically a green or yellow or red dot is very good. And just one quick note, that's true for almost all the genetic traits we look at, but lactose intolerance in this case is not a good example.
Oh, okay. That's funny. All right. Okay, yeah, go on.
In this specific test, we don't have a yellow result. because in this case, when you have the genetic variant in only one of the gene pairs, still the gene is still working well. In this case, we will only have green or red. So yeah, just a point for that. But
That's
in
hilarious.
general,
Okay. Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
in comparison to a yellow dot, a red dot is usually associated with lower expression of the gene and therefore worse outcomes for the health issue for which the genetic variant is associated. In terms of treatment, this means that someone with a red dot will need a bit more intense interventions than someone with a yellow dot. But of course, this is very general and depends on the gene and the health issue we are looking at.
Okay. So for some people, their yellow is more practically, it's like, is the yellow a just a step down from their green, or is their yellow a step down from their red? Like and my favorite analogy is that there's a flaw I think with the traffic light system, because how you interpret a yellow light when you're driving a car going through an intersection really depends on the culture you're from. So if I'm in a Scandinavian country and I see a yellow light, yellow means red, it means stop. But if I'm, say, in Italy, yellow means a hard green, and you speed up and go through it.
Yeah.
So that's, so culturally, like, and I say that tongue in cheek, of course, but people, understand that not every yellow is like, sometimes yellows they're really dependent on which genes are yellow. Like one gene's yellow acts like a red, and another gene's yellow acts more like a green. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Good point.
So let's talk about gluten. So people with a red or yellow dot in the celiac disease section, does that mean they don't do any gluten at all? So just for context, for people who are new to this particular panel, the genes that are tested in gluten, these are the genes that are specifically for the risk of celiac disease. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's correct.
So what happens if someone has a variation in one but not the other?
So in all genetic tests for celiac disease, a positive result, which in this case, either yellow or red, in this case only means a slightly increased risk of celiac disease in comparison to the rest of the population. So it's not a diagnosis. However, if
No,
you get a
definitely not.
negative,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
just to be clear for our audience, like, just because you have the genetic risk doesn't mean you have the thing. It's just the risk is there. Yeah.
yeah, it's important to clarify that. And for this particular issue, a negative result, so if you get a green dot, is very useful because this can rule out almost completely the possibility of having or developing celiac disease. So this is very useful when diagnosis with other methods is not clear or you have family history. If the patient has symptoms and gets a positive result, a yellow or red dot, then it's recommended to confirm diagnosis with other methods. And in that case, if the diagnosis is confirmed, is when they should stop having gluten.
Okay. And so if people have a yellow or red dot and they haven't gone through the formal confirmation of do they have celiac disease or not, would it be helpful for them to just get the certain enzymes that like clear gluten, like gluten clearing enzymes during or after a meal, just in case? Because some people may not want to go through like a punch biopsy of their intestines or other whatever methodology is being used.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It depends on the actual diagnosis because digestive enzymes are helpful for people with gluten intolerance or sensitivities, but not for celiac disease, because these enzymes can help the body break down and digest gluten. In celiac disease, which is, as you said, what we cover here in Food Choice, this is a serious autoimmune disease in which the body reacts negatively to gluten, so these enzymes wouldn't help.
Okay. So is there any genes known to be a risk for non-celiac gluten sensitivity? Or because I've seen this term also a lot. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity, people who do not have the genes that they will manifest celiac, but they still react in some way to gluten.
Yeah, these are also relatively common issues, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but at the moment, unfortunately, the genetics of these issues are not established yet.
Yeah.
So we couldn't include it in food choice yet.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah. What I believe is going on is that there's in non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it may not necessarily be only the gluten that's creating the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and maybe the other stuff that's going along for the ride with the gluten. So like if people are eating like inorganic grains and there's just all these pesticide residues, that may be they're blaming the gluten, but it may not be the gluten. Maybe what's on the gluten themselves. I don't actually fully know, but I'm just speculating that what may be irritating the gluten is a Trojan horse, or it's a straw man to something else that's actually being irritated when they're eating it. Anything else on gluten you wanted to share with us? Otherwise, we'll just go right into the lactose portion.
Yeah, happy to continue with lactose.
Okay. So when it's this question about lactose, this is personal because this is my experience of eating dairy, is that I have been reactive to dairy my whole life. And I did I did the genetics test, and I found out that I don't have lactose intolerance, but I did another test, a specific kind of food intolerance testing through another, that was it was a blood test. It was just seeing like what are the antibodies that are circulating in my system right now, or the inflammatory markers based on certain foods. And it turns out that I was actually reactive to whey and casein, which are the two other known reactive proteins that are in dairy. And are there any additional genetic tests for people like me that that aren't reactive to lactose but still react to dairy because it's the whey and casein? So basically, are there any genetics tests for whey and casein?
That's interesting, yeah, because some people might think that they are lactose intolerant, but they might be reacting to other ingredients. However, as far as I know, there are no genetic tests for whey or casein issues because so far there have not been any study looking at genetic predispositions for these issues. But similarly as before with gluten, as genetic research is evolving, this could change very soon.
Yeah, it's because lactose is a milk sugar, where whey and casein are milk proteins. So how that translates into the genetics of our human digestion, I have no idea. Lactose may have been, and I don't know the details of. I know lactose tolerance is a relatively new phenomenon in human evolution, and it's also really heavily studied. So maybe whey and casein are just, I don't know. I mean, those two are proteins. Lactose is a sugar. So hopefully, there'll be some more scientific development on it. The next one is alcohol. So this is a section where can be very confusing for certain people, where they see like, oh, I'm a green dot in alcohol, that means that I can have alcohol. And it's like, oh, I'm a red in alcohol, I mean I can never have alcohol again? That's no fair. And so I just wanted to get the alcohol confusion addressed, because it's by far, particularly certain countries where drinking alcohol is practically a sport. It could be a very emotional section of the test for people to look at. So if someone is a green dot in the alcohol intolerance section, that means they're more vulnerable to the possibility of alcoholism because they don't, quote, feel the negative effects of it as readily as someone in the yellow or red dot. Correct?
Yes, there are in fact many studies that have shown that the genetic variants that we associate with lower risk of alcohol intolerance are also associated with higher risk of alcoholism. Because of that same reason, people can have alcohol without feeling the negative side effects, so they get used to it and continue drinking more and more.
Yeah, there's people that they drink alcohol and they like flush red, or they just feel sick, or they get super angry, or whatever it may be. And for those people that are genetically very sensitive to alcohol, when they like, because their liver can't metabolize it quickly or easily, they just feel unwell or act unwell. There's that negative feedback loop that this is bad for this is bad for me. And the people with the green dot, that they can metabolize alcohol efficiently, they don't get that feedback, so they can prone to drinking more and more. Without that, I mean, I know a guy when I went to graduate school with, and he would get very sick if he ever had alcohol, and he just stopped. As much as he liked hanging out with his friends or drinking, like, he just couldn't do it. And so he became sober simply because he got so ill. Meanwhile, there's probably one person at least I can think of who was on his way towards an alcoholism because he didn't get sick. So how much alcohol are we talking here? For example, kombucha has 0.5% or so of alcohol, compared to a 5% in beer, and obviously more in wine and more in hard liquor. Tinctures even have some alcohol in it, even though they may be like distilled in like really clean vodka, like 20-30% alcohol, but the amount is so small that you're taking like a half dropper full or whatever it is. Do people with a red dot need to stay away from all alcoholic containing products, even kombucha and tinctures, or is it dose dependent?
So in general, people with red dots for alcohol intolerance should avoid alcohol as much as possible, not only because of the symptoms related to the intolerance, but also because they are at a higher risk of other long-term diseases related to alcohol intake. In terms of the specific limit, it's hard to say. It's been said multiple times that there is no safe level of alcohol, right? But there are no studies that have specifically looked at the health effects of having drinks like kombucha with less than 0.5% alcohol. So the actual limit is not very clear. And actually, I've also read some articles that explain that it's practically impossible to get drunk, even if you keep drinking drinks with less than 0.5% alcohol, because the body metabolizes the alcohol as quickly as it's ingested. So it's not clear, but I would say that 0.5% would be a fair limit.
Yeah, the lore is that in the US, I'll just quickly pulled up the articles pulled over for alcoholism from the lore was that kombucha wasn't really regulated as an alcoholic beverage until there was this woman who was an alcoholic who then switched to kombucha, but she was drinking like bottles and bottles and bottles and bottles of it, and she was pulled over for not driving safely. And the cops said, "You've been drinking?" Like, and she's like, "No, I've been having kombucha," and then that was reported to the FDA, and then that's what began the major crackdown on the alcohol percentages in kombucha, because there was this one case study. There was this case study, this woman who literally drank so much kombucha she got drunk, and then suddenly now there's all this big regulation on kombucha in the United States. Because so I guess anything is possible. One can heroically drink kombucha to the point of being drunk. So good for her, I guess. I mean, but yeah, I interviewed I interviewed a gentleman who has one of the largest kombucha brewers in New Zealand, and like he he used to be a very big drinker. That's why he switched to kombucha and actually want to manufacture kombucha, and normalize it in New Zealand society along in the bars. You can buy kombucha along next to the beer. And he knows what heavy drinking is. And he just knows, like he was able to stop alcohol by switching to kombucha. And just even 1 an hour, he said, like, I have absolutely none of the signs of alcoholism or anything that I had from before. So yeah, I do recommend kombucha as a substitute for alcohol. The one thing I do warn my clients about is to watch out for too much sugar in the kombucha. That sometimes the kombucha can be a massive amount of sugar in it. And I recommend people get a kombucha that's 4 grams or less per bottle, which can be hard because sometimes it's like 4 grams per serving, and there's like 2 to 3 servings, in the bottle. So the next one is caffeine. How would you determine if too much caffeine is too much, particularly if one is a yellow dot?
400 milligrams of caffeine a day is usually the maximum amount recommended for most healthy adults. So for people with caffeine sensitivity, so those that have yellow or red dots in the genetic test, a lower amount, for example, 150 milligrams at most, has been reported to be most recommended for these cases.
So 150 milligrams would be what, like 1 cup of strong coffee or something? I know there's a chart that's included in every report of the different types of caffeine concentrations and average, like whether it's like strong coffee or different types of teas and things like that. So I know, like, I'm a red dot in caffeine, and I absolutely get the caffeine induced anxiety and like depression that if I have too much caffeine, I get like super jittery and like feeling very low. That's one of the main things about this profile that really changed my life for the better, is that the caffeine section really was confronting, and like it just held my feet to the fire that, what, I can't kid myself about caffeine anymore. Like, I was trying to make it as like bulletproof as possible. Like, I tried to buffer the effects of caffeine with like ghee and coconut oil, MCT oil, and like, cardamom and licorice and other things that were for like liver and adrenal. Yet I still felt really anxious and jittery. So I'm wondering, are you aware of if someone is a red and yellow dot and sensitive to caffeine, is there anything you're aware of that can help them still enjoy coffee without getting the deleterious effects?
Well, there are some types of coffee without caffeine that are more healthy. And in general, drinking more caffeine than recommended can have very negative consequences to manage anxiety and for overall health. So if you have caffeine sensitivity, I would recommend to stay away from caffeine as much as possible, or not trying to counteracting the effects with other substances, because caffeine will be inside your body anyway. So just to look for healthier alternatives to coffee would be my recommendation.
Yeah. I've had clients say, well, if it's decaf, what's the point? I'm like, well, there's a point.
Right, if you like the flavor.
Yeah, flavor. And there's also, there's also good antioxidants in coffee. Some people I can't some people can even I mean, I know some people, I don't know if it's like the possibly like the histamine stimulation in some of the coffee, but some people even can't do decaf. But I direct people to the organic decaf freeze dried Swiss method decaffeinated crystals if they're wanting the flavor of coffee without the caffeine. So the next one is salt. So this is about the risk factor of salt increasing blood pressure. So there's the genes that you look at for blood pressure that can be influenced by salt. And so my question is that, if we're going to talk about salt and blood pressure, the salt has been demonized as causing high blood pressure in the West for a very long time, but there's so many factors that go into blood pressure, like stress and weight and gender, males are affected, are more affected than females. Maybe it's to do with estrogen. So my question is, like, if someone has a red and yellow dot but has normal blood pressure, like I'm a red dot and I have totally normal blood pressure, and I have plenty of, what I think of as healthy salt, Celtic sea salt, Hawaiian salt, or New Zealand sea salt. And I monitor my blood pressure. My blood pressure is totally fine. And yet I have a red dot in my salt genes, but salt doesn't seem to affect it at all in my case, at least yet. But I'm not overweight. I don't have many of the other risk factors associated with high blood pressure. So, and I don't eat junk salt. Like there's like a normal piece of white bread, like has tons of salt in it. And it's not like Celtic sea salt that has all the minerals. It's just like this junk white salt. So I know it's kind of a long lead up to, like, how, can you just give me your thoughts on, is salt really the problem, even if you have a red and yellow dot, but you don't have high blood pressure?
So as you have mentioned, there are many risk factors for high blood pressure, such as age, family history, gender, weight, physical activity, stress, smoking, and alcohol.
Yeah.
But also salt, of course, is one of these reported risk factors. And addressing all of these and not just reducing salt is the best way to lower blood pressure in case you have high blood pressure. If someone has salt sensitivity, then of course it makes more sense to focus on reducing salt. And if you have a genetic predisposition to salt sensitivity, it's also possible that it is just a predisposition, so maybe it's not really affecting your blood pressure. So I think you need to take into account both your predisposition and then look at your actual phenotype. And if you need, in case you need it, then you could replace salt with other healthier alternatives.
Yeah. My sense is that, like, if someone has a red and yellow dot and all the other factors, stress, age, weight, alcohol, smoking, all the rest of it, I would first want to look at personally, like, can we help them with their weight, their stress, smoking, alcohol, and getting them to higher quality, get them off like overtly junk salt foods, like the processed foods and all that, before just removing salt and thinking that we fixed it. And if someone has the genetic predisposition and has high blood pressure and needs to get it down, and is the other factors aren't working, then I'm absolutely, like, clinically on board to, like, let's reduce their salt, because if these other things aren't working, then yeah, let's cut it. Because it's like people do need salt. Salt was actually currency, for the huge part of human civilization. So I just, yeah, I appreciate how you and in the report have, like, said, like, it's a factor, not the factor.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next one's it's newer. It's on histamines. And so can you review the mechanism of histamines? What are histamines?
Histamines are biologically active substances that are released by immune cells during immune reactions, and their function in the body is to increase the permeability of the blood vessels to white blood cells and other proteins to facilitate the elimination of pathogens in infected tissues.
Okay, so basically, like, we've got blood vessels, and then the cells, around the blood vessels, and then there's immune cells in the blood vessels, like white blood cells. And if there's an infection or something going on, histamine is there to, like, open up the blood vessels a little bit to let these white blood cells kind of sneak in, escape to go deal with whatever's going on. Is that good enough? Okay. So can you explain why histamine intolerance leads to similar effects of seasonal allergies, like headaches, itchy skin, runny nose, fatigues, hives, digestive issues? Meaning, like, if someone is super sensitive to histamine, it's like their immune system is overactive.
So during seasonal allergies, immune cells release histamine to respond to these allergens or triggers. As I just mentioned before, histamine helps the blood vessels to become leakier. So white blood cells and other proteins can get out and attack these pathogens. And most of the symptoms of seasonal allergies, such as congestion, swelling, watery eyes, are due to these leaky blood vessels. With histamine intolerance, what happens is that the body accumulates too much of histamine. So it keeps doing its function in the blood vessels and creating the related symptoms, but in this case, for no reason, because there are no pathogens that needs to be attacked.
So the histamine intolerance means that we make the histamine, we just can't get rid of it when the job is done. And so the body still thinks it's under attack, even though there's nothing there. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So then can people take DAO enzyme, DAO? So these are enzymes that are used to break down histamine. So can people who have a histamine intolerance take enzymes to make up for the fact that they genetically don't have the enzymes to break down histamine after the job is done?
Yes, although more clinical studies are needed, some studies have already shown that taking this DAO supplementation or enzymes could be very useful to alleviate symptoms or avoid risk of histamine intolerance.
Okay. And then do you have any comment on the effects of coffee and caffeine on histamine?
Yes, coffee beans themselves are low in histamine, but caffeine can block the function of DAO in the metabolism of caffeine. And therefore, in general, coffee is not recommended for people with histamine intolerance. However, some people choose to have other types of coffee that are more recommended in these cases. This is also relevant to the caffeine section we were talking about before. For example, grain coffee or carob coffee.
Right.
Have been shown to be better in these cases.
Okay, so that's really interesting. It's caffeine, not the coffee bean, but caffeine is actually blocking the enzymes from breaking down histamine. So people can appear to have a histamine intolerance, not because they have it genetically. It's just that the enzyme is getting gummed up from doing its work, creating as if you did have the histamine intolerance. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so that would explain why, like, if I have, one of the things that would happen to me is that if I had too much caffeine, I would start to get itchy. Like my skin would start to be itchy, because I already had an intolerance to caffeine. So maybe like so let me see my logic. If this is just kind of coming to me now. So what would happen is that I couldn't break down caffeine fast enough. So there was more caffeine around in my system compared to someone who was at a normal genetic thing. So that means I had extra caffeine because I couldn't break down the caffeine. And as a result, the extra caffeine, because the caffeine wasn't broken down, was now affecting the enzymes that would otherwise break down histamine. Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, that's
okay.
correct. So caffeine is affecting you in all possible ways.
Great, lucky me. All right. Fantastic. So food allergies. All right. So this is also a new section. And so there are 6 genes listed that make up the food allergies section, with the most common food allergies being peanuts, milk, eggs, shellfish, wheat, soy, and fish. Sorry, wheat, soy, and fish. So how do you interpret someone that is a red or yellow dot? Some people that get this report may think that they might be automatically allergic to peanuts, milk, eggs, shellfish, wheat, soy, fish, if it's a red or yellow dot. Yet what if you don't have the overt symptoms or an allergy? Is there like a subtle immune response that they're having inside the body that isn't outwardly manifesting it? And I'll use myself as an example. Like I can, with milk, I have an issue with the whey and casein, but and I have had times in my life where I've been reactive to soy, and I stay away from wheat anyway, but I don't have reactions to egg and shellfish and peanuts, but I am, I do have, a dot and a yellow dot in this section. So, sorry, I'm not sure about how you would interpret the difference of yellow and red dot for all these different reactions.
So food allergies might be more tricky than other food-related issues because the genetics are less well established, and they also have a very strong environmental component. So it's totally possible to have the yellow or red dots and never develop food allergies. Of course, this only means that you have the genetic predisposition, but doesn't mean that you will develop a food allergy with a 100% chance. It depends on other environmental and possibly not known genetic factors. And of note, I'd like to mention that 5 of the genes we look at in the food choice panel are related with risk of any food allergy, and one of them is specifically related to risk of peanut allergy.
Okay, so then how would you, if you're looking at 5 genes, how do you determine if someone is globally like a red or yellow dot? Because if you're looking at 5 different genes, how do you determine if someone is like a red as a whole or a yellow as a whole?
Yeah, we have some simple algorithms, and red means the higher number of these genes have the negative variant, and if it's green, is that none of them has the non-beneficial variant, and yellow would be something in the middle. Of course, the more genetic risk factors you have for a health issue, then the more likely you will be to develop this health issue.
Okay, so it's an algorithm. Okay, that makes sense. So why are some people more prone to severe allergic reactions starting at infancy or early childhood? Is this related to a specific SNP in a gene, a specific cluster, or is it, is it related to these 6 genes, or is it these 6 genes plus like other things that are just hyper accentuating the response in infancy and early childhood?
Yeah, that could be. Since I just mentioned, allergies are caused by a complex interplay between genetics and the environment. So it's possible that the people who start developing severe allergies early in life might have all these 6 genetic variants associated with food allergies, plus other unknown risk factors. And it's also possible that the environment they were in contact with in such a short time in life didn't help. For example, I've read some interesting articles in which they explain how the diet of a mother during pregnancy and lactation can also help or prevent or not prevent with the development of food allergies in the children.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Like there's even, I learned in one nutrition class that, one way that's been shown in some research to prevent a child from having peanut allergies is to give, I don't remember what trimester, I don't remember at all, but like you give a tiny amount of peanut to a pregnant woman, and it will kind of just gently introduce peanut to the immune system of the fetus so that they don't have this 5-alarm fire response to peanut the first time they're exposed once they're after they're born. So it's like giving micro exposures, and I don't like this. I don't know the dosage. I don't remember the trimester. But I just remember listening to that. So is there a specific gene? I'm going to talk about like, food allergies and skin. Like, is there a specific gene cluster that relates to things like acne? Because I know that people can have skin issues that result from allergic reactions. Is there anything that we would see on the food set of genes and food choice that would point to particular skin issues?
Yes, some of the gene clusters we look at for food allergies have also been associated with some skin problems, for example, eczemas or psoriasis,
Mhm.
because these disorders also involve the immune system. Other skin issues such as skin oxidation protection or nutritional needs of the skin would be better represented in our health and well-being panel, but we don't specifically report about that.
Okay. So other questions are, is there, talking about food intolerances and allergies, is there a specific gene cluster that relates to what I would call puffy weight, meaning that specific genes in the clusters that create an inflammatory response that affects weight? I've seen this so many times in clinical practice where I remove food triggers and this layer of puffy weight, this like water retention weight, falls off. And I'd love to know your genetic and metabolic understanding of how that happens, because I see it in
Mm.
practice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In our food choice panel, there are no specific genes related to puffy weight. However, as you have noticed, there is an interesting connection between removing food triggers from the diet and reducing weight. In a healthy digestive system, this system takes care of the process and delivery of nutrients to all the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when there is some type of food sensitivity or allergy, the digestive system becomes stressed and doesn't work as well as it should. So it tries to stock up all these nutrients, leading to increased weight. I would also like to mention that we are working on a new panel
Oh, okay.
focused on genes related to obesity by
Oh,
different mechanisms.
okay, cool.
Yeah, mostly will be about differences in taste, perception, and hunger level. But I will tell you about this next time when you invite
Okay.
me for another interview.
Yeah. So you're talking. So this is there's a new panel on obesity, and if I recall that there are some genes that people can be like tasters and super tasters,
Hmm.
and that if they're more sensitive to bitters, people who are super sensitive to bitters will have a very different diet to people who aren't sensitive to bitters and will eat like, so that will affect their weight because they're eating basically different foods. Or
Yeah, that's
yeah,
it.
that's one thing, right? Like that's the only thing I'm aware of. Okay, and so great, yeah.
Hmm.
Any extra additional genetic information on to help people with managing obesity would be fantastic, because that's, I mean, like you're in Australia, and Australia has the dubious honor of lots of obesity in the country. It's same thing, in the States. Okay, then what about, what's one of the most surprising things you've learned about doing these food trigger profiles on people? So, like for example, which of these results have you found people surprisingly open to, and also which of the results you found people to be very resistant to?
So I don't directly deal with patients. However, from talking with friends, they usually seem happy to easily make most necessary lifestyle changes to improve their health, except for alcohol, usually for younger people, even though if they find out that they have a genetic predisposition to intolerance and they have the symptoms, that seems to be a bit harder. Decreasing caffeine also seems a bit harder for them. However, when they found out that one of our genes in the panel, the ADORA2A gene, is related to anxiety and sleeping problems following caffeine intake, this seems to give a bit more motivation to make a change if they need it.
That was my case. Yeah, I
Mm.
quit coffee when I got my results. I was kidding myself about, I'm making the most bulletproof coffee ever by putting all this coconut oil and coconut milk and ghee and all this other stuff into it. And it's just, I know it works for a lot of people to add those other things, but I was literally, you know, can trying to convince myself that I wasn't anxious and feeling depressed, an hour or 2 hours after drinking caffeine. But I was. But when I actually saw that my own genetics staring me in the face, I finally accepted reality. and cut out coffee. As much as I miss it a lot, actually, I'm very grateful to this profile because it made me face the music on caffeine. And I've in my clinical practice, I found people the most reactive emotionally to the caffeine and alcohol. Like you said, like it's the confronting things. And the alcohol, having, you know, I lived in New Zealand for a bit, and alcohol consumption there can be very problematic. And showing people their profiles around alcohol was extremely confronting for some people. But you know, genes don't lie. It is what it is. I had one gentleman. I mean, this is one reason why I like the work that you do so much. Is like I literally had one gentleman who went through this was before the time of this particular profile. I was actually on the health and well-being panel, where I knew he was over drinking, and there's those 8 liver genes on that other profile, and he came in, and I handed him the report and was about to say something to talk about it, because I was going to try to talk to him about, like, basically he's not only alcoholic, but his liver genes were really not conducive at all to detoxing anything. Like he was really one of the worst of the 8 liver genes that are mentioned. Like I think like 7 of them were like red and yellow dot, like really bad. He just flipped right to the liver section without me saying anything, and was really quiet as he was reading it over. My instinct was, don't say a word, say nothing, don't say anything, just sit there, just don't say anything. And he just looked at it and was really quiet. And he said, no prompting on my part, I guess this means I have to give up alcohol, doesn't it? And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I said, well, in your case, yes, your liver is quite challenged. And like that report basically got this man to wake up and stop being an alcoholic. Like that's and I don't want to directly thank you for, like, you, the company, and everyone by extension. Like these reports do change lives, and the alcohol bit, it can be the most confronting one for people, but it absolutely has saved people's lives. So thank you. Some other questions I have for you: if our genes are unchanging and all food allergies and intolerances technically are genetically predetermined, is there anything else that can be done aside from avoiding potential food triggers?
So most of the health issues we look at, including the food intolerances and allergies, are very complex. So it's possible to have the genetic predisposition, but actually developing can depend on other factors. And there is a lot of research about how to lower the risk of food allergies, as you mentioned before, or also celiac disease. But this also depends on how strong the genetic component is. For example, for primary lactose intolerance, the genetic component is very strong, and there is little we can do to prevent it if we have this predisposition.
Okay. So I've also had clients ask me, how do you respond to someone, can my red or yellow dots ever become a green dot? How would you respond to that?
I would say straight that it's impossible to change our genetic results, because what we call green or yellow or red dot in these profiles represents a variant in a particular gene. So that's part of our DNA or genetic makeup, which is always the same since we are born until we die. These genetic variants usually have an effect on the expression of the genes. So what we can do is to follow nutrigenomic interventions that have been shown to increase or decrease the expression of the genes to improve health.
Okay, yeah. So the genes are hardwired. They can't change them. You can. I like the dimmer switch analogy. Like genes, you can dial up or dial down, but you can't change this. You can't remove the switch. And Yeah, that's basically what I tell clients as well. I think what they're confusing is genetics and epigenetics. I mean, we're talking red and
Yeah.
yellow, green dot. That's genetics. Epigenetics is how environment, lifestyle, everything affects how it's expressed.
Hmm.
So how do you frame results from genetic profiling, especially red and yellow dot results, so that the information comes off as empowering as opposed to like anxiety provoking, fearful, or just plain stressful? I've seen this so many times. People that get a genetics report back, it's like, oh my God, I have a red dot in gene. I'm doomed. And they just get panicky and like, it's very disempowering.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that what we do is to look at predispositions and not diagnosis. And there is a lot of research showing how lifestyle changes or any nutrigenomic intervention can be really useful to improve health. So it's important to focus on the positive part, because being aware of our genetic predispositions gives us power to improve our well-being, and also important knowledge about what health areas we should focus.
Yeah, and that's one reason I like the profiles the you make, is because you're focusing on the genes that are empowering, that there are practical things that can be done. And I really, really, really appreciate that about the work that you're doing, because you're very conscious about picking proactive, empowering genes that can be actioned on, as opposed to scaring people. And that's so great, because I've seen so much damage done from people getting these lists of hundreds of genes that half of them they don't know what to do or can do anything about. It's just like it's like some sort of slow moving genetic car crash in the eyes of the client, that, oh, well, I can't do anything about that, you know? So again, thank you for making a genetics profile that is practical, helpful, and inducing optimism in a client as opposed to fear and panic. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about the basis of food intolerances and allergies that you want our listeners to know about?
I would like to remind listeners that genetic research keeps evolving very fast, and I'm sure that in a few months or years, there will be a lot more known about the genetics of food intolerances and allergies, as well as many other areas of human health. And this is important because the more we know, then the more useful genetics can be to help with prevention and management. Our food choice panel has been developed by carefully looking at all the published scientific evidence, and we also consider all the existing limitations. So this panel can be a very good tool to improve your diet, and of course, to know more about yourself, which is always interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I love these genetics panels. They meaningfully changed my life. I see it over and over again, changing the lives of my clients. And that the science is continuing to evolve, and we're just going to get more and more skilled and empowered as time goes on. And it's people like you that are taking I don't even know how many articles are published on genetics every week. I mean, I'm glad. I mean, I'm happy I don't have to dig through that research as part of my job. I rely on people like you to like translate what's meaningful and powerful and empowering and practical. And I'm just so grateful for people like you that are taking all this complex genetic research and translating it into something actual, helpful for the rest of us. So thank you so much, Dr. Fortuna. I'm very grateful you took this time to chat with us about these food triggers and food intolerances and food allergies. It's a very confusing topic for a lot of people, and this pretty straightforward genetics test really does demystify a lot of people's personal food triggers. And just thank you again. I really appreciate talking with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was nice. Thank you for having me, and look forward to talking next time.
Yeah, me too.